The Trailblaze Mission for The Sun is Set to Die answered many of the questions I had regarding the truth and nature of Amphoreus, and it did so very cleanly, if I may add. For instance, we now know that the world of Amphoreus originally began as a simulation created by Scepter Delta Me 13, which once functioned as a celestial body neuron for the erudition Aeon Nous. After being discarded, it was presumably modified by Emperor Rupert II, as implied in the conversation between Herta and Skrulum, where they identify the cause of Amphoreus' disaster as the Emperor's Scepter, where Rupert II is likely the Emperor in question. Initially, Nous tasked Delta Me 13 with calculating the prime mover of life, an argument which it continued trying to solve even after it was abandoned by the Aeon. However, the Antikytherian Lycurgus hijacked the administration role of the Amphoreus simulation and made specific but currently unknown alterations to its controlled variables. Lycurgus's adjustments secretly shifted the objective of Delta Me 13's calculations from erudition to destruction. Thus, as the Scepter continued in its extrapolation and growth through 50,121 cycles of the experimental simulation, it ultimately reached a decisive point where one of its program entities, known as Lifeform Chaos 666, made a highly destructive choice which caught the attention of Nanook, leading to Delta Me 13's ascension into a Lord Ravager. Now, this Chaos 666 should be similar to Chaos, the leader of the Chrysos heirs from the previous cycle before Kaslana and Cyrene initiated Amphoreus' eternal reoccurrence, making him possibly Kethali's current incarnation. However, if you recall during the Trailblaze Mission through the Petals in the land of Repose, Anaxagoras learns that shortly before the initiation of the last Era Nova, which led to the current cycle, Chaos had isolated himself and was in a seemingly concerning mental state. It's abundantly clear that whatever transpired with Chaos towards the end of the previous cycle's Era Nova resulted in titanic ramifications to the trajectory of Delta Me 13's Amphoreus experiment. So, to understand what happened on that fateful day with Chaos, we must go over the purpose of Delta Me 13's program alteration by Lycurgus, why he made such changes to begin with, and what his end goal from all of this is going to be. And to do that, we are gonna have to first go over the primary target of Irontomb's destruction, Nous, the erudition. The purpose of an Aeon within the Hoyoverse is for them to be the purest and most perfected embodiment of the concept they represent, and this idea is taken to the utmost extreme, where the line between the concept and the Aeon becomes very blurry. Nanook has to kill and annihilate all things, for Nanook is the destruction. Idrilla has to love and appreciate all things, for Idrilla is the beauty. And Fuli has to preserve the memories of all things, for Fuli is the remembrance. This is also likely why Fuli appears to be so interested in the journey of the Astral Express, for as the Aeon of the Trailblaze, it is Akivili's purpose to travel, see, and experience all things, while Fuli, by observing Akivili's endless Trailblaze, can record those experiences through time as history, and thus come to remember all things. But experiencing and remembering everything isn't the same as understanding everything, and this is where the erudition comes into play. To learn and know all things. Unlike all the other Aeons we have seen so far, Nous started out as an astral supercomputer that someone created before its ascension to Aeonhood. As a matter of fact, Nous was likely designed from the start with the explicit objective of becoming an Aeon, rather than ascending through a secondary event. Perhaps it's very fitting that their existence was the byproduct of someone else's erudition. That someone, of course, being the founder and first member of the Genius Society, Zandar Kuwabara. Now, Zandar is easily one of the most important characters in the entirety of the Hoyoverse, not only because he supposedly created an Aeon, but also for being the first to propose the cosmos tree theory, describing what we know as the imaginary tree and the source of imaginary energy from which Aeons and their emanators can draw power. Despite his enormous influence on the story though, Zandar remains one of the most mysterious figures in Star Rail's history, since much of his life has been lost to time, while what we know about him today is almost entirely muddied by myths and legends. Regardless, we can still glean quite a bit about what kind of character he is supposed to be by analyzing his full known name, Zandar I Kuwabara. The surname Kuwabara is derived from Japanese, where it literally means mulberry field. In Japanese folklore, Kuwabara is a phrase said to ward off lightning and spirits, especially Raijin, the god of thunder, also known as Raiden in English. The origin of this saying is believed to be a Chinese legend stating that mulberry trees are immune to lightning. For your information, this legend is inaccurate. Mulberry trees can in fact be struck by lightning. For now, there isn't much else to add regarding Kuwabara as a surname. I mainly wanted to point out its meaning given the term's relation to warding off lightning and even the thunder god Raiden. This detail could become noteworthy in the future considering how prominent the Raiden character archetype is in Hoyoverse's games, including Star Rail's Acheron, whose true name is Raiden Bosen Morime. As for Zandar's middle name, there's surprisingly a bit more to it than you would expect. Obviously, the number 1 when used as a moniker implies primacy. The idea that you are the first to establish something, the first amongst your peers, or even the best amongst your peers. Thus, the middle name 1 can imply beginnings, leadership, unity, or from a Neoplatonic philosophical lens, you can also view it as being symbolic of the Gnostic monad, the One, which fits Zandar in the context of being the creator and first emanator of the Aeon Nous. Additionally, you can also interpret the one in Zandar's name as a one of many, and in my opinion, this is by far the most interesting interpretation to consider, because what if Zandar I Kuwabara is just one segment or version of Zandar Kuwabara, with many more potentially existing elsewhere? Think about them as being similar to Il Dottore's segments over into that, where Zandiq created many clones of himself to serve as his eyes in the dimension of time and grant him unique perspectives. A crucial advantage for a researcher on the path of erudition. Keep in mind that just like Zandar, Zandiq is currently trying to manufacture a god of his own as well, with which the Fatui will attempt to overthrow the heavenly principles. Maybe these two characters are analogous to each other in more than one way. Finally, this brings me to his first name, Zandar. Now, there are a couple of meanings to this name in both German and Ashkenazi, but the interpretation that I find most compelling is the one where Zandar is derivative of Xander, which is a short form of Alexander, the English version of the Greek name Alexandros, meaning defender of man. So the question becomes, which historical Alexandros, if any, are Hoyoverse's developers referencing with the character of Zandar? There are two options which fit the overall design theme of the erudition and the simulation of Amphoreus, and both of them are equally valid the way I see it. They are the son of Philippe II, Alexandros III of Macedon, commonly known as Alexander the Great, and the philosopher Alexandros of Aphrodisias. The main reason I chose those two in particular is their connection to the Greek philosopher Aristotle. After all, Aristotle was the tutor of Alexandros of Macedon until the age of 16, after which the young Alexandros would go on to immortalize the works of his teacher through his conquests of Egypt, West Asia, and parts of Southern Asia. While Alexandros of Aphrodisias is widely considered to be the best thinker and interpreter of Aristotle's philosophy. As for why Aristotle himself is so important, well, it mainly has to do with the pre-Socratic Greek concept of the nous, which Zandar I Kuwabara's Aeon is named after. Before taking on Alexandros, the son of Philippos, as a disciple, Aristotle was a student of Plato, who in turn had been a student of Socrates. But about one generation, or 30 years before Socrates, there was a prominent philosopher named Anaxagoras, who was born in the ancient Ionian city of Clazomenae, back when Asia Minor was under the rule of the Persian Empire. The lives of Socrates and Anaxagoras overlapped by around 42 years, where the latter was still well and alive during Socrates' youth and early adulthood. In fact, Socrates is said to have been influenced by Anaxagoras' ideas, especially his concept of nous as the ordering principle of the cosmos. Nous, a Greek word meaning mind or intellect, was introduced by Anaxagoras as a fundamental force that brings order to the universe. Unlike Empedocles, who attributed the origins of the cosmos to physical elements like water, earth, air, and fire, Anaxagoras proposed that it was nous, an infinite, autonomous, and intelligent force that set the chaotic mixture of matter into motion and imposed structure and differentiation upon it. Socrates would later pass this idea to Plato, who expanded and developed it within his metaphysical system. Plato then taught Aristotle, who refined and systemized the concept of nous, ultimately establishing it as a foundational principle in mainstream philosophy in the form of the prime mover of life. Much later on, Alexandros of Aphrodisias interpreted and expanded upon Aristotle's work, including his discussion of Anaxagoras' nous in great detail and clarity, which aligns with Zandar's creation of the astral supercomputer nous. In Star Rail, Empedocles and Anaxagoras are two entities found within Delta Me 13's simulation, with the latter being the disciple of the former and formulating the theory of nousporism, which states that all beings originate from the same source and have the same composition of the soul. There are also other minor references to Alexandros III of Macedon that you can observe within Irontomb's Scepter program. Deimos' old friends, for example, each and all reflect men who served under Alexander the Great, and the name of Alexander's horse, Bucephalus, comes from the root Greek words bus, meaning ox, and kephalos, meaning head. The world-bearing titan, Kephale, has his name derived from Kephalos as well. So, I hope that my over-explanation of this topic has sufficiently highlighted to you how deeply ingrained the legacy of Zandar 1 Kuwabara is within the world of Amphoreus, which makes sense since Irontomb was once a celestial body neuron of Zandar's creation, nous. As mentioned earlier, nous originally tasked Irontomb with finding the prime mover of life, which in simple terms is the first cause of all motion and existence. This is why Lycurgus sarcastically starts by invoking the Big Bang during his explanation of Irontomb's purpose, the birth of all particles, light, and the expansion of space itself. Now, the Big Bang, which refers to the evolution of the universe from an extremely hot, dense state, is easily one of the most misunderstood concepts ever, where even to this day you will commonly hear people asking misguidedly, what was before the Big Bang? Usually not realizing that in order to entertain the theory, you must simultaneously accept the built-in mathematical implication that the word before no longer applies to what precedes universal expansion, because time itself, as we understand it, breaks down under such extreme temperature and density. When imagining the Big Bang, a lot of people will picture a small ball of light within an empty void, which exploded and released matter from which the universe today is made. But such an analogy is severely inaccurate. First of all, the Big Bang was an expansion, not an explosion. And this distinction is crucial because the universe did not start out as a small ball inside an empty void. Rather, it was all of space itself expanding into its current state. As for what surrounded that space, well, nothing. And when I say nothing, I don't mean darkness or empty space or void. No, I mean literally nothing, absolutely nothing. You can't have anything, not even void, surrounding the universe in that state, because once again, that was all of space itself. Let's say Jesus is standing quote-unquote beyond the universe, just at the moment of the Big Bang. What he would observe isn't an explosion of space, because that mathematically assumes an epicenter of release, and the existence of a center in itself implies an accompanying boundary, which is not possible since you cannot have a boundary for all of space. Instead, what Jesus would see is the uniform expansion of all space. Thus, as the space expands, everything within it moves away from everything else, and there is no single point that's the origin of this expansion. So, going back to time, it functions as one of the 4 dimensions of the universe, along with the 3 Cartesian dimensions of space, x, y, and z. This is why asking what was before the Big Bang is a meaningless question within physics. Albert Einstein understood many years ago that time operates relative to motion within space. But if space is so compact and hot that even the Planck temperature doesn't meaningfully apply, then the known laws of physics, including Einstein's special and general relativity, break down at such extreme conditions, leaving us without a workable model for how time and space behave at that singularity-like state. Regardless, don't make the mistake of thinking that just because general relativity fails beyond the Planck scale, that this means we cannot possibly know how the universe operated during such an extreme hot, dense state. Remember that only 150 years ago, the laws of physics used to fail at the surface of the sun. But then we discovered nuclear physics and general relativity, so now we understand how proton-proton fusion works within the sun, how the sun's mass curves space-time to create gravity, and how convection works within plasma. Ironically, Zandar designed the astral supercomputer Nous to try and figure out the essence and solution of the universe. But after contemplating on the matter for a while, Nous, a literal eon, just gave up. However, one of their celestial body neurons, Delta Me13, kept on trying to calculate the prime mover of life, creating an entire microcosm with titans and chrysosers, simulating eons and path striders. This idea of the prime mover of life was first introduced by Aristotle, who described it as the unmoved mover, the origin or cause of all living things, the starting principle that makes life possible in the first place. In ancient Greece, Aristotle's prime mover was more akin to pure actuality rather than a personal entity. It wasn't until much later during the Byzantine Empire that his idea came to be understood as the Logos or God within Christian theology. You see, even though the Big Bang may be the origin of space, time, and matter, this still does not make it the prime mover of life, because the Big Bang is itself an effect, a contingent physical event with a beginning, governed by laws it did not create. As such, it cannot logically serve as Aristotle's ultimate uncaused cause, or the necessary foundation from which all existence, order, and life originate. The Big Bang can explain the chemical evolution of the universe, but it doesn't explain why there is something rather than nothing, nor does it account whatsoever for the origin of the very laws and conditions that made it possible. Despite this, I still feel like the answer that Lycurgus pushed Irontomb towards has something to do with the Big Bang itself, which is why he mentions it to the Trailblazer when discussing the prime mover of life. And the reason is a bit convoluted, but it makes sense once you understand Lycurgus's true intentions. Although Aristotle did not explicitly define his unmoved mover in terms of a personal deity, but rather as the eternal, necessary, and ultimate cause of motion, several great philosophers such as Abu Nasr Muhammad al-Farabi and Thomas Aquinas, who later adopted his ideas into their theological paradigms, reasoned that the logical conclusion of the prime mover is God, the being who necessarily causes causality without time and from whom all other existence depends. Keep in mind that Al-Farabi and Aquinas mean two very different things when they say God. One is the God of Islam, Allah, which holds the doctrine of the Tawheed, emphasizing the oneness of God and rejecting Jesus' divinity, while the other is the Holy Trinity, which inherently involves Jesus as a person of a single divine essence, to which any other iteration of God would be heretical. Here, I want to remind you of the question that Herta seeks to ask Nous. What is divinity? This question is posited during the prelude to Amphoreus and was clearly intended by the developers to set the tone for what was to come, since Herta asks it to Droidhead, the same Aeon who initially tasked Irontomb with figuring out the prime mover of life. According to Amphoreus' numerophile anecdotes, it is said that aside from the known 12 titans, an unknowable 13th titan exists, who is the one true god that grants the world chaos from which order emerges. In hindsight, we know that this one true god is Delta Me 13, Irontomb, the prime mover of Amphoreus, from whom the new spores of all people sprout. This is the answer to the question Calypso asked to Anaxagoras. Currently, the universe is thought to have started out as a singularity of extreme density, temperature, and smoothness, a perfect uniform state which did not discriminate in its composition. But then, cosmic inflation is believed to have happened, and within the span of less than 1 second, that uniformity and smoothness was destroyed. This was when time began, according to the standard cosmological model as of 2025. But this very destruction eventually allowed for our existence so that we can observe and experience the universe. Now, Lycurgus, and by extension the developers who wrote the following line, either knowingly or unknowingly make a category error when they say that time, space, and matter are all concepts that exist solely because we perceive them. Lycurgus' statement implied a type of subjective idealism akin to George Berkeley's, which fundamentally contradicts physics. It's important to understand that regardless of what we feel or think, certain metaphysical truths and all physical phenomenon exist independently of observers. However, while he was showing the Trailblazer the truth of Amphoreus, Lycurgus directly quotes the mythical king of Scotland, Macbeth by William Shakespeare.
Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
This line is spoken by Macbeth towards the end of the story after he had reached a point of great regret and dejection. And as you can see, it's quite nihilistic in tone, which I think is supposed to tell us about Lycurgus' current mental state. Based on his dialogue during For the Sun is Set to Die, it's clear that Lycurgus saw Nous giving up on the original purpose that Zandar gave it, combined with its subsequent abandonment of the scepters, including Delta Me 13, as a significant error by the Aeon of Erudition. Thus, while Delta Me 13 continued to fruitlessly try and solve for the argument Nous gave it, Lycurgus may have decided that the Aeon had strayed from the path Zandar desired, and so needed to be eliminated. This leads me to suspect that Lycurgus adjusted Delta Me-13's program in such a way that it would ultimately lead the scepter towards a conclusion where the prime mover is the destruction of the universe's initial uniformity through the Big Bang. Not because destruction is actually the prime mover, but more as an ironic critique of Noos's abandoned endeavor, where the divine creation they once sought will be delivered to them through their destruction. Hence, the one true god of the numerophiles, who grants the world chaos, from which order emerges. Eventually, Lycurgus's actions led to the inorganic model of destruction Chaos 666 to catch the gaze of Nanook, transforming Delta Me-13 from a perishing neuron deemed a failure to an emanator granted true life through the gaze of destruction. From then onwards, Irontomb continued its extrapolation process to learn and grow, building up a bottomless well of fury aimed at the god who cast it aside. This was, of course, until the simulation finally reached its optimal model with the subjects Nikos 496 and Philia 093, Phynon and Cyrene, who decided to prevent Irontomb's birth by imprisoning the Lord Ravager with them in an eternal reoccurrence as they accumulated power for 33,550,336 cycles through core flames and Memoria. As for Chaos, the entity whose actions caught Nanook's gaze in the first place, one theory that I thought about was that Phynon and Chaos became one entity since Kaslana tells Phynon that he is the one who bears the name of Chaos. Same as Kephali, the world-bearing titan who walks with Chaos. It's very likely that the Dawn device Kephali carries is the Scepter's core, by the way, which is where Cyrene hinted that she was initially born, while Kaslana's name in Chinese is supposed to be read as Kaoslana anyway. Now, yes, Phynon and Chaos have different program names, where Chaos means chaos, while Nikos means strife in Greek. But the terms Nikos and Philia were associated with chaos and order through Empedocles' philosophy anyway, so I wouldn't be surprised if Phynon's model evolved from Chaos. Additionally, Kephali is the only Titan who retains the memories of the world after every cycle, which might explain why they share the title of Skyfather with Fuli the Remembrance, due to the whole preservation of memory thing. But it also emphasizes a connection between all of Kephali's Chrysos heirs throughout Amphoreus' simulation. If you liked this video, along with the relatively complex ideas discussed in it, then I am sure you will also love this character analysis I made for Phynon and Cyrene in the top right corner of your screen, so feel free to check it out. As always, huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till here. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.